Everyone, it's Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies and my emotional audit. And today I want to talk about something called epigenetics. And this is what really controls the way you feel, how you age, the kind of diseases you get, basically everything about your health and well-being. And it's an interesting term, isn't it? Epigenetics means above genetics. I talked about this a lot in my book, A Scar That Won't Heal, because I'm very interested in the interface between mind and body in what I call mind-body medicine. And so we used to think, didn't we, that your genes controlled everything and they were kind of like the blueprint for your life. And what we now know actually is that genes are not the be all and end all. In fact, they are what you'd call the hard disk and not the operating system. All right. They are the predispositions. They set the tone for your life experience, but they don't control it. What controls it, very interestingly, is your environment. Now, let me explain a little bit more about that. Let's start with the history of kind of genetic understanding, because there was an explosion in the sort of 1970s, 1980s, an understanding that the genes were very complex and that perhaps if we understood them all, if we mapped them all, we would cure all human disease. That was the understanding behind what was called the Human Genome Project, which sort of was undertaken in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And the idea was if we mapped the genome, which is the collection of genes, we would have like the blueprint for life for the human being, and we would be able to intervene where genes were faulty. We could insert new genes that would create a better outcome. So things like muscular dystrophy, for instance, which is one of the pure genetic diseases. Huntington's chorea is another one. And there are other diseases, maybe like breast cancer, which has a BRCA gene involvement, that it doesn't cause it as such, but it does influence whether you're likely to develop it or not. And so the white heat of research interest was to make sure that if we understood it all, very left brain this, if we understood it all, we could fix it, okay? And then they did the work, and there was a huge international collaboration of research scientists, and it took 3 years to map the entire human genome. Now it would take probably a few months because the technology's improved so much. And they found we had roughly 20 to 22,000 genes at the time, which was so totally shocking. It made people think, well, there must be a mistake. We've obviously measured wrongly. Because rice has 40,000, all right? Rats have more, you know? It seemed completely opposite to what you'd expect. If the human is considered to be the most complex living organism alive, let's say, that's obviously a human perspective, then we would expect the genes to be the most numerous and complex. Well, one thing was right about that and one thing was wrong. Yes, they are complex, but they're not that numerous because, as I've just said, the genes are the hard drive, right? And what turns them on and off, what actually operates them, is things in the environment. And so you don't need a huge number to make complexity. You just need variation of which genes come on and off. And if you think 22,000 doesn't sound like a large number, but if you were to do the probability of switching all the different genes on and off, the probability of any one configuration is huge, isn't it? So you've basically got infinite variation or very high, large numbers. I'm going to go into the maths here, but large number of variants through that genome, depending on which are turned on and which are turned off. And so this is the complexity conundrum, okay? That's what it was termed, you know, why a human being would have so much less than lesser organisms. I'm just putting that in scary quotes because, again, that's a human-centric view. So what's missing from the story, okay? One word, the microbiome. Okay, now in my previous video, I talked about the gut as being more than a digestive system. And I came on to the idea that the microbes that live in and on us are part of our genetic imprint. We are not a human being as an individual, we are a human community of individuals. In other words, the microbes that live on us or in us are contributing, they're exchanging genetic information with us all the time. And so looking after your microbiome, eating good food, drinking pure water, getting exercise, being outside in fresh air, hopefully, are all part of maintaining our relationship with this community. And what's really interesting is that the microbiome is conveying information to us, and it's picking up information from us. So it's actually having a dialogue with us. And a large part of that is genetic, okay? Because microbes reproduce at a much faster rate than we do, you know. They can double in seconds. So that's their kind of gift to us, is adaptability. They've gifted us the chance to modify and change our responses in the light of whatever's going on in our environment. And so that's why really we host so many microbes, is because we can't change that quickly, but they can. And what's really key, I think, is to understand that the genes in your, say, in the nucleus of your cells are not this fixed thing that kind of create the proteins and respond by allowing us to grow and so on. This is what I learned in biology in school. You know, you had your DNA, you created the proteins from the RNA, and the proteins went and did all the work. Well, yes, that's true, but there's a complex story around that. You know, what causes what genes to be read, for instance? How does the DNA get unwound? Because as you know, DNA is a tightly coiled, not only is it a double helix itself, but it's also like a ball of wool. It's wrapped around itself and in a protein sleeve called histones. And so in order to get to the DNA to read it, it has to be unwound specifically in different segments. And what causes that to happen is protein signaling, largely, as I said, from either the microbes themselves or from us, telling us what ones are appropriate to be read and therefore translated into proteins. And a good example would be zonulin, which is a tiny little protein called a peptide, which is secreted when your gut needs to be more permeable and allow semi-permeable, I should say. It's a semi-permeable membrane, your gut, and it needs to allow certain proteins in, but not others. And when your gut becomes too permeable, you get something called leaky gut syndrome. And that's where you've lost the dialogue between what's appropriate in this environment, and you're just allowing everything in. Hence, you get all sorts of autoimmune diseases because large proteins are coming through instead of just tiny ones that the body needs. So zonulin is a peptide or small protein that is secreted in order to control the permeability of your gut membrane. So it's a really fascinating insight, but that's only one of thousands and maybe millions of proteins. We haven't isolated them all yet. We really don't understand everything that we're doing. We think we know so much, and actually we're only at the beginning of our understanding, I would say. So Bruce Lipton was a great writer on this, and he wrote The Biology of Belief, which was an absolutely classic book written, it's over 15 years, I think now, 15 years ago. Nobody had realized that beliefs and thoughts and emotional kind of imprints would have any influence whatsoever on your DNA, on what was read, on the kinds of proteins that you're producing, but it clearly does. And we know that people who are in harmony with their values and that live a lifestyle that suits them actually live longer and healthier lives. And that's why. And he was very instrumental in outlining the principle of that. And he also gave us a very good understanding that the previous kind of model that we had, that the nucleus was like the brains of the cell, And that's the bit where the DNA is largely contained. It's not the only place where there's DNA, but it's where we get the majority. We certainly have our chromosomes in there. And he demonstrated that if you took the nucleus out of a cell, the cell could carry on living. Now, how could that be if it no longer had a brain? But if you destroy the membrane of the cell, it dies very, very quickly. And so his theory, which has now been proven, is that the membrane is like a semiconducting crystal, and it actually stores information holographically, I would say. It stores information about what's outside and what needs to happen inside. And so membranes are actually really, really key as well, and probably more so than the nuclear DNA. And then there are the mitochondria, right? Mitochondria are your energy factories, okay? Most people know that. Athletes know this, there's a lot of biohackers out there who talk about mitochondrial function. But did you know it has its own DNA as well? All right, little circular DNA. It's not like the double helix in the sort of big clusters that we see in the nucleus. All right, and guess where mitochondria came from? All right, if you have a look at what they look like, you'll see they look remarkably like bacteria. Okay, and there's a reason for that. They were once bacteria that fused with an original animal cell hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we were evolving. And so we get the benefit of this quick change response that bacteria give us through their mitochondrial, as it is now, but their DNA, their looped DNA. They get the benefit of fairly constant conditions in the human being, all right? Because a homeostasis, which is a term given to maintaining an internal balance, is fairly well controlled. And so bacteria get the benefit of a nice, warm, cozy environment, and we get the benefit of this quick reaction and adaptability to our environment. So microbes, folks, are evolved with us. They actually give us a lot of what we are. They give us intelligence in some ways because they're picking up signals and transmitting it to our brains via peptides and other molecules called cytokines. There's so much that we didn't know and that I didn't learn when I studied biochemistry and physiology. So, folks, mitochondria are very, very key because they're signaling. I'll talk about that more in one of my next videos. But you are not a single organism. You're not an I. You're a we. And keeping care of your microbes, as I've said, is so key to good health. So look after yourselves and see you in the next vid. Take care. Oh, and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.